There's a moment most people know but rarely talk about. You're in a room. Maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's a dinner, maybe it's a conversation that suddenly got more important than you expected. And something happens. Someone says something, or looks at you a certain way, or asks you a question you weren't prepared for. And instead of responding naturally, instead of just being there, you feel yourself shrink. Not physically, something quieter than that. A pulling inward, a slight dimming of whatever you were about to say. You smile, you nod, you let the moment pass, and then you spend the next 3 hours replaying it, thinking of everything you could have said, everything you should have been. You know that feeling. I think most of us do. What's strange is that it doesn't go away on its own. People assume it will. They assume that experience, success, time, that eventually these things will smooth it out, that one day you'll just wake up and the self-doubt will have quietly packed its bags and left. But it doesn't work that way. I've seen people with impressive careers and full lives who still feel it, still shrink in rooms where they should feel at home, still hold back in conversations where they have something real to offer. The external markers of success pile up, and underneath them, the same old question stays lodged. Am I actually enough for this? That question is what this audiobook is about. Not about silencing it with affirmations, not about pretending it isn't there, about understanding where it comes from, how it operates, and how to build something so solid underneath you that the question simply stops having power. I want to be honest with you about what this is and what it isn't. This is not a motivational experience. I'm not going to pump you up for 40 minutes and leave you feeling great until tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and real life walks back in. That version of confidence, the borrowed kind, the kind that requires constant topping up, is one of the things we're going to dismantle in the first chapter. It's built on the wrong foundation, and it always, eventually, collapses. What I'm offering instead is something more demanding and more durable. We're going to go into the psychology of how confidence actually forms. Not how we wish it worked, but how it genuinely operates inside your nervous system, your behavior patterns, your relationships, and your sense of self. Some of what I'll tell you will feel uncomfortable. A few things will probably push back against beliefs you've held for years. I'd encourage you not to resist that discomfort too quickly. The ideas that create the most initial resistance are often the ones doing the most useful work. Here's what I know after a long time thinking seriously about this. Confidence is not a personality trait you either lucked into or didn't. It's not a feeling you wait for. It's not something that arrives once you've achieved enough, proved enough, or convinced yourself hard enough. Confidence is a skill, and like any real skill, it has a structure. It can be understood. It can be practiced. It can be built deliberately, even from very unfavorable starting conditions. The word dangerous in the title is intentional. I don't mean dangerous as in aggressive or intimidating. I mean dangerous the way a person becomes dangerous to the limitations they've been living inside. Dangerous to the old stories about what they're capable of. Dangerous to the comfortable smallness that's been, in some ways, easier to maintain than genuine growth. When you build the kind of confidence we're going to talk about, something changes in how you move through the world. And that change tends to unsettle the version of things everyone around you had gotten used to. That unsettling is not a side effect. It's part of the point. We'll move through 15 chapters, and each one builds on the last. We start with the lies, the well-meaning but genuinely harmful ideas about confidence that most of us absorbed without questioning. Then we go into the neuroscience, Because understanding what your brain is actually doing under pressure changes your relationship with it. From there, we build the architecture: competence, presence, social intelligence, emotional regulation, psychological resilience, the ability to perform when the stakes are real. Along the way, we'll talk about fear, about self-doubt, about the moments when everything you've built feels fragile, and about what it takes not just to survive those moments, but to use them. By the time you reach the end, I don't want you to feel inspired. I want you to feel oriented. I want you to have a clearer picture of who you're becoming and a genuine sense of how to get there. Not through a single dramatic transformation, but through the kind of steady, honest, unglamorous work that actually produces lasting change. The room you walked into at the beginning of this, the one where you felt yourself shrink. You're going to walk into rooms like that for the rest of your life. The question isn't whether those moments will come. The question is who you'll be when they do. Let's begin. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Lies That Keep You Small. Let's start with something that might sting a little. Most of the advice you've received about confidence, from books, from well-meaning people, from the endless stream of motivational content that fills every corner of the internet, most of it has been making the problem worse. Not because the people giving it had bad intentions, but because it was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what confidence actually is and how it actually forms. Before we can build anything real, we need to clear the ground. And that means being honest about what's been sitting on it. The first lie is probably the most widespread, and in some ways the most damaging. The idea that you can think your way to confidence. That if you repeat the right phrases to yourself often enough, with enough conviction, you'll eventually believe them. Stand in front of the mirror and tell yourself you're capable. Write affirmations in a journal every morning. Visualize success until it feels real. You've heard this. You may have tried it. Here's what actually happens. Your conscious mind dutifully repeats the words, and your deeper mind, the part that's been keeping track of everything you've actually done and not done, every time you said you would and didn't, every moment you know the truth of, that part isn't fooled for a second. There's a gap between what you're saying and what you believe, and your nervous system lives in that gap. Instead of producing confidence, the exercise produces a very specific kind of quiet distress. The distress of knowing you're performing for yourself. Real confidence doesn't come from what you tell yourself. It comes from what you've proven to yourself. It comes from evidence. From a history of showing up in difficult situations and coming through them. From a track record, however small, of doing hard things and surviving. Your deeper mind is not interested in your affirmations. It's interested in your actual record. Feed it evidence, and it will give you certainty. Feed it words, and it will give you nothing but the hollow echo of words. The second lie is subtler, but it does enormous damage. The belief that genuinely confident people don't feel afraid. That fear is the symptom of a confidence deficit, and once you fix the deficit, the fear goes away. This is completely backwards. The most genuinely confident people I've encountered are not people who've stopped feeling fear. They feel it constantly. Before important conversations, before big decisions, before they step into rooms where the stakes are real. They feel the quickened heartbeat, the tightening in the chest, the voice that says maybe not, maybe wait, maybe you're not ready. What's different is not the presence of fear. It's the relationship with it. They've learned, through experience, not through willpower, that fear is not a stop sign. it's just a signal. And signals can be acknowledged without being obeyed. When you believe that confident people don't get scared, you set yourself a trap. Because the moment you feel nervous before something important, which you will every time for the rest of your life, you interpret that nervousness as evidence that you're not confident enough. And then you wait. You wait to feel ready. You wait for the fear to subside. And the fear doesn't subside, because the fear never completely goes away. So you keep waiting. The opportunity passes, and the waiting becomes its own kind of habit, its own kind of identity. The courage that builds real confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the accumulation of moments when you acted in spite of it. The third lie is one that sounds like wisdom. It's dressed in the language of self-belief and positive psychology, and it goes like this. Confidence is about believing in yourself. Trust yourself. Back yourself. Believe you can. The problem isn't the sentiment. The problem is the mechanism. When your confidence depends on believing in yourself, in some fixed, fully formed version of yourself that already has the answers, you're placing an impossible demand on the present moment. You're asking yourself to already be the person you're trying to become. And when the inevitable gap appears between who you are now and who you're demanding yourself to be, the whole structure collapses into self-criticism. What actually works is something different, and the difference is precise. It's not about believing you already have what it takes. It's about trusting that you can figure things out as they unfold, that you don't need all the answers before you begin, that your capacity to learn, adapt, and respond is reliable enough to carry you through situations you haven't encountered before. This shifts the weight from performance to process. It moves you from the pressure of already being capable to the more sustainable confidence of knowing you can become capable. That shift is not small. It changes everything about how you approach uncertainty. The fourth lie is one most people recognize but underestimate. Fake it till you make it. It sounds pragmatic. Act confident, and confidence will follow. Project what you want to feel. But here's what actually happens when you spend extended time performing a version of yourself you don't believe in. You're not just pretending. You're constantly monitoring. You're watching yourself from the outside, checking whether the performance is convincing, scanning for any sign that someone has seen through it. That level of self-surveillance is exhausting in a way that's hard to describe unless you've lived it. And it produces the exact opposite of what confidence actually feels like from the inside. Genuine confidence is not self-conscious. That's one of its defining qualities. When you're truly at ease, you're not thinking about how you're coming across. You're not managing an impression. You're simply present, in the conversation, in the room, in the moment. The attention that was previously absorbed by the performance becomes available for everything else. For listening, for thinking, for genuine connection. When you're faking it, you cannot be fully present, because part of you is always backstage, keeping the show running, and people sense that absence, even when they can't name it. Something feels slightly off. The words are right, but something underneath them isn't landing. That feeling is the distance between performance and presence, and it's one of the things real confidence closes. There's a thread running through all four of these lies, and it's worth naming directly. They all try to solve the problem from the inside out, by managing how you feel rather than by changing what you do. They treat confidence as an emotional state to be manufactured rather than a capacity to be built. They focus on the symptom and ignore the root. Real confidence is not a feeling you generate before you act. It's a recognition that forms after you've acted, after you've done something difficult and come through it, After you've proven something to the part of yourself that only believes what it's seen. The sequence matters. Action comes first. The feeling follows, not the other way around. This is uncomfortable because it means there's no shortcut. There's no reframe or mantra or morning routine that replaces the actual experience of doing hard things. But it's also, genuinely, good news. Because it means confidence is not a gift some people were born with and others weren't. It's a construction. It's built piece by piece, decision by decision, in the ordinary moments when you choose to move towards something instead of away from it. The lies kept you waiting for a feeling that was never going to arrive on its own. What we're building instead is something you'll never have to wait for again. Chapter 2. Why your nervous system decides before your mind does. Before you even finish a thought, your body has already made a decision. That's the part most people never see. They believe they are thinking their way into fear, hesitation, or insecurity. But what's actually happening is much faster, much older, and far less logical than they assume. Your nervous system reacts first. Your mind explains it after. And if you don't understand this, you will spend years trying to fix confidence at the level of thought, while the real driver sits deeper, untouched. Think about a simple moment. You're about to speak in a room where people are watching you, or you're about to say something honest that might not be received well, or you're about to send a message that matters more than you want to admit. Before you consciously decide anything, your body shifts, your breathing changes, your chest tightens slightly, your attention narrows, your heart rate increases. You might not even notice it consciously at first, but something in you has already labeled the situation as important and potentially dangerous. This is not weakness. This is biology. Your brain is constantly scanning for threats, not just physical threats, but social ones. Rejection, embarrassment, loss of status, disapproval. These register in your system in ways that are far more intense than they should be in a modern environment. Because your brain was not designed for modern life. It was designed for survival in small groups, where being rejected could mean being excluded, and being excluded could mean not surviving. So your system learned to take social risk very seriously. The problem is, it never updated. To your nervous system, a difficult conversation can feel similar to physical danger. A room of strangers can feel like exposure. Uncertainty can feel like loss of control. And when your system detects these signals, it does not wait for your rational mind to analyze the situation. It acts. It floods your body with stress chemistry. It prepares you to protect yourself. And here's the critical part. When that happens, your thinking changes. You do not think clearly under perceived threat. You think defensively. You think quickly, but not deeply. You focus on immediate risk instead of long-term direction. You become reactive instead of deliberate. This is why, in moments that matter, people say things they later regret, or say nothing when they should have spoken, or avoid entirely instead of engaging. It is not because they lack intelligence. It is because their nervous system has taken control. And once that happens, your ability to access your full capability drops. You are no longer operating at your best. You are operating in protection mode. Now here is where everything starts to shift. Your nervous system does not actually know what is dangerous. It only knows what feels unfamiliar, uncertain, or previously associated with discomfort. It learns through repetition. If you repeatedly avoid something, your system records it as dangerous. If you repeatedly face something and survive it, your system begins to reclassify it as manageable. This is one of the most important mechanisms behind confidence. Not belief, not motivation, familiarity. If you've ever noticed how something that once terrified you now feels almost normal, you've already experienced this. The first time you did it, your body reacted strongly. The second time, slightly less. After enough exposure, the reaction changed completely. The situation did not change. You did. Or more accurately, your nervous system updated its prediction. It stopped labeling the situation as a threat. And once that happened, your thinking improved. Your communication improved. Your presence improved. Not because you forced it, because your system allowed it. This is why people who try to think their way into confidence get stuck. They are trying to override a system that is not listening to logic. It is listening to experience. You can tell yourself, this is not a big deal 100 times. But if your body has no evidence to support that, it will continue reacting the same way. This is also why overwhelming yourself often backfires. Some people hear this and think they need to face their biggest fears immediately. They throw themselves into situations far beyond their current capacity, and instead of building confidence, they reinforce fear. Because the experience becomes too intense, too much, too fast. The system does not learn this is safe. It learns this is overwhelming, and it doubles down on protection. There is a better way. Progressive exposure. You step just outside your current comfort zone, not far enough to panic, but far enough to feel something. You stay there long enough for your system to settle. You repeat that process. Gradually, your tolerance increases. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes normal. And each step builds evidence. Not theoretical evidence, lived evidence. That is what your system trusts. There is another layer to this that most people overlook. Your environment. You do not develop confidence in isolation. Your brain is constantly mirroring what it sees. When you spend time around people who are tense, reactive, insecure, or constantly seeking approval, your system picks up those patterns. Not consciously, automatically. In the same way, when you are around people who are grounded, calm, direct, and comfortable in uncertainty, something in you begins to adjust. You start noticing different behaviors, different pacing, different responses under pressure. And slowly, your system begins to recognize new possibilities. This is not about copying people. It is about exposing your nervous system to different standards of behavior. Your brain is always learning what is normal. The question is, what are you feeding it? Finally, there is something subtle but powerful. Anticipation. Your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next. If your past is filled with avoidance, hesitation, or negative outcomes, your system begins to expect similar results. And when it expects negative outcomes, your energy drops. Your motivation drops. Your willingness to engage drops. You start pulling back before anything even happens. But when you begin building small wins, real ones, not imagined, something shifts. Your brain starts expecting you to handle things, not perfectly, but adequately. And that expectation changes how you enter situations. You move with slightly more willingness, slightly more openness, slightly less resistance, and over time, that compounds. Confidence is not one big moment. It is a pattern your nervous system learns, a pattern that says, I have been here before. I know what this feels like. I can handle this. Not because it is easy, but because it is familiar. And when something becomes familiar, it stops controlling you. That is the real beginning of confidence. not when fear disappears, but when your system stops treating every challenge like a threat. Chapter 3. Evidence, not hype. There is a quiet shift that separates people who keep chasing confidence from people who actually build it. It is not louder motivation. It is not stronger belief. It is a different standard. People who become grounded in themselves stop asking, "How do I feel about this?" and start asking, "What evidence do I have?" That question changes everything. Because feelings are unstable, they rise and fall depending on sleep, stress, environment, memory, even what happened 10 minutes ago. If you rely on feelings to decide whether you are capable, your sense of confidence will always be fragile. One bad moment can undo it. One awkward interaction can shrink it. One piece of criticism can distort it. But evidence behaves differently. Evidence accumulates. Evidence stabilizes. Evidence does not disappear just because your mood changes. Think about something simple. If you have driven a car for years, you do not need to convince yourself that you can drive. You do not repeat affirmations before getting behind the wheel. You do not stand outside the car trying to feel confident enough to start. You just start. Because your system has evidence. Not one experience, hundreds, maybe thousands. And that evidence has shaped something deeper than belief. It has shaped certainty. Not loud certainty, quiet certainty. The kind that does not need to announce itself. Now compare that to an area of your life where you feel uncertain. It might be speaking in a group, setting boundaries, making decisions without overthinking, taking risks that expose you. In those areas, you likely do not have enough evidence. So your system hesitates. And instead of recognizing the absence of evidence, most people interpret that hesitation as a flaw in themselves. I'm not confident. I'm not that kind of person. I'm just not good in those situations. But what they are actually saying is, I haven't built enough proof yet. That is a very different problem, and it has a very different solution. Because if confidence is built on evidence, then the path forward is not to feel better. It is to gather better data. This is where many people resist. Because gathering evidence requires action. Not dramatic action. Not perfect action. But real action. Action where something could go wrong. Action where you do not control the outcome. Action where your identity is slightly exposed. And this is exactly where most people stop. They want confidence without contact. They want certainty without risk. But confidence is a byproduct of contact with reality. There is no way around that. Let me show you something subtle. When people say, "I just need to feel more confident before I do it," what they are really saying is, "I want to feel like someone who has already done this before I do it." But that is backwards. You feel like someone who has done something after you have done it enough times. And not always successfully. Sometimes awkwardly. Sometimes imperfectly. Sometimes with outcomes you did not want. But even those moments count as evidence. Because your system is not only learning from success, it is learning from survival. It is learning that you can enter discomfort and still remain intact. This is why small actions matter more than dramatic ones. A single big win can feel good. But it does not always build stable confidence. Because your system may interpret it as luck, or an exception, or something that cannot be repeated. But repeated small actions, those create patterns. They teach your system what is normal. And once something becomes normal, it stops feeling threatening. This is how confidence becomes automatic. Not because you forced it, because you trained it. There is another important distinction. Competence creates confidence, but only when it is specific. Vague improvement does not build strong evidence. You cannot become generally confident. You become confident in specific domains. You become confident speaking clearly in one-on-one conversations, then in small groups, then in larger rooms. You become confident making decisions in one area, then applying that process in others. You build it piece by piece, stack by stack, layer by layer. This is where most people get impatient. They want the identity before the structure. They want to feel like a confident person everywhere, without first becoming competent somewhere. But real confidence is built locally before it becomes global. It starts narrow, then it expands. And every time you prove something to yourself in one area, your system becomes slightly more willing in another. Not because you are the same everywhere, but because you begin to trust your ability to adapt. That is the deeper layer. Confidence is not just about what you can do. It is about what you believe you can figure out. You do not need evidence for every possible situation. You need enough evidence that you can handle unfamiliar ones, and that only comes from experience. There is also something else you need to see clearly. Avoidance is also evidence. Every time you back away from something that matters, your system records that too. Not consciously, but deeply. It starts building a different story. This is not safe. I do not handle this well. This is something we avoid. And over time, that story becomes automatic. You do not even question it anymore. It just feels true. That is how people slowly shrink their lives, not through one big decision, but through repeated small avoidances that quietly redefine what feels possible. And the opposite is also true. Every time you lean slightly forward instead of back, every time you stay in a moment instead of escaping it, every time you say the thing instead of swallowing it, you create a different kind of evidence. One that says, I can be here. I can handle this. I do not need perfect conditions to act. That evidence compounds, not overnight, but reliably. And over time, something changes. You stop needing to convince yourself because you already know. Not everything, but enough. Enough to move. Enough to stay present. Enough to trust that even if things go wrong, you will not collapse. And that is where confidence begins to feel different. Not like something you are trying to generate, but something that naturally follows how you have been living. So if you are looking for one shift to take from this, let it be this. Stop asking how to feel confident. Start asking, what evidence am I building today? Because that answer is shaping who you are becoming, whether you notice it or not. Chapter 4. The self-doubt voice and how it hijacks you. There is a voice in your mind that sounds like you, but does not actually serve you. It speaks in your tone, it uses your language, it references your past, and because of that, you trust it far more than you should. That voice is self-doubt, not the occasional uncertainty that helps you think carefully, but the automatic, repetitive pattern that quietly shapes how you see yourself and what you believe is possible. If you listen closely, you will notice something. Self-doubt does not speak randomly. It follows predictable scripts. The problem is not that you have these thoughts. Everyone does. The problem is that most people never question them. They hear the thought and immediately treat it as truth. That is where the damage happens. Because once you believe the thought, your behavior adjusts to match it. And once your behavior adjusts, your life begins to shrink in ways that feel justified. Let's slow this down. Imagine you are about to do something slightly uncomfortable. Speak up, reach out, try something new. Before you act, a thought appears. What if this goes badly? That seems harmless, reasonable even. But notice what often follows. Your mind does not stop at possibility. It moves towards certainty. You will mess it up. They will judge you. You will regret it. And suddenly, what started as a question becomes a prediction. This is the first pattern, catastrophizing. Your mind jumps to the worst possible outcome and treats it like the most likely one. Not because it is logical, because your brain is trying to protect you. If it can convince you something is dangerous enough, you will avoid it. And avoidance feels safe in the short term. But every time you accept that prediction without question, something else happens. You strengthen the pattern. You teach your system. This is how we interpret uncertainty. Over time, your mind becomes faster at generating these scenarios, more convincing, more automatic, until you no longer see them as thoughts. You see them as reality. There is another pattern that runs just as quietly. Mind reading. You walk into a room. Someone looks at you briefly, then looks away, and your mind fills in the story. They don't like me. They think I'm awkward. I said something wrong. The problem is not the thought. The problem is the certainty. You are acting as if you have access to information you do not have. And almost always, you assume the negative version. Rarely do people think, they're probably distracted. They might be nervous too. They might not have noticed anything. Your mind does not choose the neutral explanation. It chooses the threatening one. Because again, it is trying to protect you. If you assume rejection early, you can withdraw before it happens. But this protection comes at a cost. You start interacting with imagined reactions instead of real ones. You adjust yourself based on stories, not facts, and that slowly disconnects you from reality. There is another pattern that traps people for years. Fortune-telling. You decide what will happen before anything happens. I won't get it. They won't respond. This won't work. And because you believe it, your behavior changes. You either do not try, or you try in a half-committed way. And then, when the outcome matches your prediction, you take it as proof. See? I was right. But you were not right. You created the conditions that made that outcome more likely. This is how self-doubt becomes self-fulfilling. Not because it predicts the future, because it shapes your actions in the present. There are two more patterns worth seeing clearly. Personalization and all-or-nothing thinking. Personalization is when you take responsibility for things that are not actually about you. Someone is distant. You assume you caused it. A conversation feels off. You assume it reflects your value. Something does not go well. You carry all of it, as if you are the center of every negative outcome. This creates unnecessary pressure, and it distorts your perception, because reality is rarely that simple. Most things are influenced by multiple factors, but self-doubt simplifies everything into one conclusion. It must be me. And then there is all-or-nothing thinking. You either did it perfectly, or you failed. You either sounded confident, or you embarrassed yourself. You either belong, or you do not. There is no middle ground, no nuance, no space for learning. And because perfection is impossible, this pattern guarantees dissatisfaction. You are constantly measuring yourself against an unrealistic standard. And every time you fall short, self-doubt grows stronger. Now here is the important shift. You do not need to eliminate these thoughts. That is not the goal. Trying to silence your mind completely often makes it louder. The goal is different. You change your relationship to the thoughts. Instead of, "This is true," you begin to notice, "This is a thought." That sounds simple, but it creates distance. Instead of being inside the thought, you are observing it. And from that position, you can question it. Gently, without aggression, without panic, just curiosity. What evidence do I actually have? What else could be true? Is this a prediction or a fact? Most of the time, you will realize something. There is very little concrete evidence supporting the negative conclusion. It is a pattern, not a reality. And once you see that clearly, the thought loses some of its power. Not completely, but enough. Enough for you to act anyway. There is one more layer that matters: how you treat yourself. Most people are harsher with themselves than they would ever be with someone else. They say things internally they would never say out loud. They expect perfection. They punish mistakes. They turn small errors into identity statements. And then they wonder why they feel stuck. Because no system thrives under constant internal attack. Self-compassion is not about lowering your standards. It is about changing your tone. You can still want to improve. You can still push yourself. But you do it without turning every moment into a verdict on your worth. You allow yourself to be in progress, and that changes how you move. Because when you are not afraid of your own reaction, you become more willing to engage with reality. That is the quiet shift. Self-doubt does not disappear when you become confident. It becomes less convincing, less controlling, less automatic. It becomes something you can hear without obeying. And once that happens, your life starts opening again. Not because fear is gone, but because it is no longer in charge. Chapter 5. Stop trying to be impressive. There is a subtle trap that keeps many people stuck for years. It doesn't look like insecurity. It often looks like effort. It looks like trying to speak well, trying to appear confident, trying to be interesting, trying to be liked, trying to be respected. From the outside, it can even look like ambition. But underneath all of it, there is a quiet tension, a constant monitoring of yourself. How am I coming across? Did that sound smart enough? Am I saying the right thing? Do they think I'm confident? And the more you try to manage these questions in real time, the less present you become. This is where a lot of people get it backwards. They think confidence comes from improving how they appear. So they study body language. They rehearse what to say. They try to control tone, timing, posture, expression, everything. And while some of those skills matter, they miss the deeper issue. They are still focused on themselves. And that focus creates pressure. Because now every interaction becomes a performance. Not a conversation, not an exchange. A performance. And performance always carries the risk of failure. Which means your nervous system stays alert. Watching, correcting, adjusting. And that internal activity is exactly what people can feel, even if they cannot explain it. You have probably experienced this before. You meet someone who seems like they are trying very hard to impress. They speak a lot. They add extra details. They try to be funny, or insightful, or dominant. But something feels slightly off. Not wrong, just forced. There is a subtle lack of ease, and your body picks up on it. Not consciously, but intuitively. Now think of someone different. Someone who does not seem to be trying to impress at all. They speak when they have something to say. They pause without discomfort. They listen without rushing to respond. They are not trying to prove anything, and because of that, they feel more grounded, more real, more trustworthy. This is the shift. Confidence is not built by becoming more impressive. It is built by becoming less self-preoccupied. The more attention you spend on managing your image, the less attention you have for what is actually happening. And when your attention leaves the moment, your ability to respond naturally disappears. This is why over-preparation can sometimes backfire. Not because preparation is bad, but because it can make you rigid. You become attached to saying things a certain way, and when the moment changes, as it always does, you struggle to adapt. You are trying to follow a script instead of responding to reality. And real confidence is always responsive. It is not pre-packaged. It is not rehearsed to perfection. It is alive in the moment. That does not mean you abandon skill. It means you stop clinging to control. There is another layer to this, the need to be liked. This one runs deep, because at some level, we are wired to seek approval, to belong, to avoid rejection. But when that need becomes dominant, it changes how you show up. You soften your opinions. You avoid tension. You agree when you do not fully agree. You filter yourself constantly, not to communicate better, but to be accepted. And over time, something subtle happens. You lose clarity. Not because you do not have thoughts, because you are no longer expressing them honestly. And when you are not expressing yourself honestly, your system feels it. That tension builds. And others feel it too, even if they cannot name it. Because people trust what feels consistent. And when your internal state and your external expression do not match, there is a gap. Real confidence closes that gap. It does not mean saying everything without awareness. It means you are not hiding behind constant adjustment. You are willing to be seen more directly. And that requires something most people avoid. The willingness to be misunderstood. Because the moment you stop trying to manage everyone's perception, you lose control over how they interpret you. Some people may not agree. Some may not like your tone. Some may misread your intention. And if your confidence depends on universal approval, that will feel threatening. But if your confidence is rooted in self-trust, that risk becomes acceptable. You do not need everyone to understand you. You need to remain aligned with yourself. That is a very different standard. There is a simple way to notice where you are on this spectrum. Pay attention to your attention. In conversations, where is it? Is it on yourself? On how you sound? On what to say next? On whether you are being judged? Or is it on the other person? On what they are actually saying? On the moment that is unfolding? On understanding, not performing? Where your attention goes, your presence follows. And presence is one of the strongest signals of confidence. Not exaggerated energy, not dominance, presence. Because when you are fully present, you are not divided. You are not split between acting and observing yourself act. You are simply there, responding, adjusting, engaging, and that creates a different kind of impact. One that does not rely on force. It feels stable. It feels real. It feels easy to trust. So the shift here is not to try harder. It is to release unnecessary effort, to stop trying to impress, to stop trying to manage every perception, to stop trying to control how you are experienced in every moment, and instead, bring your attention back to what is actually happening. Listen more carefully. Speak more directly. Pause when needed. Allow silence. Allow imperfection. Allow the moment to be what it is. without forcing it into something else. That is where confidence starts to feel different, not like something you are performing, but something that naturally emerges when you are no longer divided against yourself. And from that place, everything becomes simpler, not easier, but cleaner. And that clarity is something people feel immediately. Chapter 6. The body of a steady person before you say a single word. Your body has already introduced you, not in an obvious way, not something people consciously analyze, but something they feel immediately. Tension, or ease, rushing, or steadiness, holding back, or being settled. And the truth is, your body often reveals your internal state more honestly than your words ever will. This is why someone can say all the right things, but still feel uncertain, and someone else can say very little and still feel grounded. Because confidence is not just communicated through language, it is communicated through regulation, through how your nervous system expresses itself physically. Most people try to fix confidence at the level of thinking. They try to change their thoughts, their mindset, their internal dialogue, but they ignore the body. And the body is where a lot of the signal comes from. Think about how you carry tension. You might not even notice it most of the time. Shoulders slightly raised, jaw lightly clenched, breathing shallow and high in the chest, movements a bit faster than necessary. Speech slightly rushed. These are small things, but they accumulate, and they send a consistent message. I am not fully settled. Again, this is not a flaw. It is a response. Your system is preparing for something, trying to protect you, trying to stay alert. But when that state becomes your baseline, it shapes how others experience you. And more importantly, it shapes how you experience yourself. Because your body does not just express your state, it reinforces it. If your breathing is shallow, your mind becomes more reactive. If your muscles are tense, your system stays on alert. If your movements are rushed, your perception of time tightens. You feel pressure, even when nothing urgent is happening. This is why physical regulation matters, not as a performance, but as a foundation. Let's make this practical. The first shift is your relationship to gravity. Most people subtly resist it. They hold themselves up with unnecessary tension. They try to control posture by forcing it, pulling the shoulders back, holding the chest up, keeping everything slightly rigid. But this creates strain, and strain is felt. Real steadiness comes from allowing your weight to settle, letting your body rest into itself, feet grounded, legs supporting you without stiffness, shoulders dropping naturally instead of being held. This is not about looking confident. It is about removing unnecessary effort. When you stop fighting your own body, something changes. You become more stable. And that stability is visible. The second shift is breathing. This one is simple, but powerful. Most people breathe in a way that keeps them slightly activated. Short, shallow breaths, high in the chest, barely noticeable, but enough to keep the system alert. When you slow your breathing down, when you allow it to deepen, when your exhale becomes longer than your inhale, your nervous system receives a different signal. Not under threat. And when your system receives that signal consistently, your baseline changes. You think more clearly. You respond instead of react. You feel less rushed internally. This is not about taking exaggerated deep breaths in public. It is about subtle regulation, a slower rhythm, a softer pattern, a body that is not constantly bracing. The third shift is movement. Watch how you move when you are slightly anxious. There is often an extra layer of motion, unnecessary adjustments, fidgeting, touching your face, shifting your weight too often, moving quickly between actions. It is not dramatic, but it creates noise, and that noise communicates something. Contrast that with someone who moves with intention. They do not rush unnecessarily. They do not add extra movement to fill space. They are not frozen, but they are not scattered. Their actions match the moment. Nothing more, nothing less. That economy of movement signals something important. I am not trying to escape this moment. And that is what people feel. The fourth shift is eye contact. This is often misunderstood. Some people avoid it completely. Others overcompensate and hold it too intensely. Both come from the same place: self-consciousness. Real eye contact is not about technique. It is about attention. When you are genuinely listening, your eyes follow naturally. You are not thinking about it. You are engaged. And that creates warmth, not intensity, not dominance, connection. This is why trying to hold eye contact can feel unnatural, because you are focusing on the behavior instead of the interaction. Shift your focus to understanding the person in front of you, and the behavior adjusts on its own. All of this leads to something important. Your body is not something you use to appear confident. It is something you train to support clarity. When your body is regulated, your mind has more space. When your body is steady, your reactions slow down. When your body is not in a constant state of subtle defense, you become more available, more aware, more responsive. And that is what confidence actually needs. Not force. Availability. Because when you are available, you can listen better. You can think more clearly. You can respond more precisely. You can stay in moments that used to overwhelm you. And over time, your system learns something new. This is manageable. Not because the world changed, because you changed how you meet it. So the next time you feel yourself tighten slightly, before a conversation, before a decision, before stepping into something uncertain, do not start with your thoughts. Start with your body. Slow your breath. Release unnecessary tension. Let yourself settle. And notice what shifts. Because confidence is not always built by doing more. Sometimes it is built by doing less, with more awareness. And when your body becomes a place of steadiness, your mind begins to follow. Chapter 7. Reading rooms without losing yourself. Walk into any room and something is already happening. Before you speak, before you introduce yourself, before anyone forms a conscious opinion about you. There is a structure, an energy, a pattern of behavior between people. Who speaks freely, who hesitates, who leads, who follows, who seeks approval, who doesn't. Most people feel this, but they don't understand it. And because they don't understand it, they react to it. They shrink in certain rooms. They overcompensate in others. They adjust themselves constantly, trying to fit what they think is expected. This is where confidence often breaks down, not because of lack of ability, because of misreading the environment and then losing yourself inside that misreading. There are two common mistakes people make here. The first is underreading. They walk into a room and remain unaware. They don't notice dynamics. They don't sense tension. They don't recognize who holds influence. They speak without awareness of context. And sometimes that works, but often it creates friction. Because communication without awareness feels disconnected. The second mistake is overreading. This one is more common. You become hyper-aware. You notice every glance, every tone shift, every pause. But instead of using that information neutrally, you internalize it. You assume everything is about you. You adjust constantly. You filter your words. You hesitate. You try to match what you think the room wants. And in doing so, you disappear. Your clarity fades. Your presence weakens. Because your attention is no longer on the interaction. It is on managing your position inside it. Real social awareness sits between these two extremes. You notice what is happening, but you don't lose your center while noticing it. You read the room without being controlled by it. This is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed. Start with observation, not interpretation. Most people jump too quickly to meaning. They see something and immediately assign a story. He doesn't like me. She thinks that's a bad idea. They're not interested. But what you actually have is limited data, a facial expression, a tone, a pause. That's it. Instead of completing the story, stay with the observation. He looked away. She paused before responding. They didn't react immediately. When you stay at the level of observation, you remain accurate. When you jump to interpretation, you introduce distortion, and distortion leads to unnecessary adjustment. Now expand your awareness. Look beyond individuals. Notice patterns. Who speaks first? Who interrupts? Who gets listened to? Who gets overlooked? Who sets the pace of conversation? Who reacts to others, and who doesn't? These are signals, not about value as a person, but about current positioning in that environment. Every room has a hierarchy, not always formal, often subtle, based on confidence, clarity, contribution, and perceived authority. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop taking everything personally, because you see that much of what happens is structural, not directed at you. This reduces pressure. And when pressure reduces, your behavior becomes more natural. There is another important layer. People are constantly testing boundaries, not always intentionally, sometimes unconsciously. Interruptions, dismissive comments, subtle challenges, shifts in tone. These are moments where positioning is negotiated, and how you respond matters. Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle one. If someone interrupts you and you immediately stop speaking, your system records something. If pressure appears, we withdraw. If someone dismisses your point and you rush to justify yourself, another pattern forms. If challenged, we over-explain. These patterns become automatic, but they can be changed. Not by reacting aggressively, not by trying to dominate, but by responding with steadiness. If you are interrupted, you can pause and continue, not with tension, not with defensiveness, just clarity. If someone challenges you, you can acknowledge it and hold your position without needing to convince, without needing to collapse. This is where confidence becomes visible, not in perfect speech, but in how you handle friction. Because friction reveals structure, and structure reveals you. There is something else that matters here. You are not just reading the room, you are contributing to it. Most people forget this. They enter environments as if they are passive participants, as if the energy is fixed, as if they must adapt to it. But presence influences space. When you are calm, it affects others. When you are clear, it sharpens conversations. When you are grounded, It stabilizes interactions. Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle one. You don't need to dominate a room to shift it. You need to remain steady inside it. And that steadiness becomes a reference point. Others feel it. They adjust to it, sometimes without realizing why. This is what people often describe as strong presence. Not loudness, not control, stability. But there is a condition. You cannot create stability externally if you are unstable internally. Which brings us back to something simple. Where is your attention? If your attention is on yourself, you lose clarity. If your attention is on the room, but tied to fear, you lose yourself. If your attention is grounded, you can see clearly and remain intact. That is the balance. You read, you notice, you understand, but you do not disappear. You stay connected to your own perspective, your own pace, your own voice, even when the environment is unfamiliar, even when there is pressure, even when there are stronger personalities present. Because confidence is not about controlling the room. It is about not losing yourself inside it. And once you stop losing yourself, you begin to move differently, speak differently, respond differently. Not forced, not rehearsed, just clearer. And that clarity changes how you are experienced, without you needing to announce it. Chapter 8. Emotional Control. In difficult moments. There is a version of you that exists only under pressure. You don't meet them when things are easy. You don't meet them when everything goes your way. You meet them when something disrupts your expectations. A comment that hits deeper than it should. A tone that feels disrespectful. A moment where you are misunderstood. A situation that doesn't go the way you planned. That is where your real level of confidence is revealed. Not in how you feel, but in how you respond. Most people believe they lose confidence in those moments. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is they are losing regulation. And when regulation drops, everything else follows. Your thinking narrows. Your tone shifts. Your body tightens. Your reactions become faster and less intentional. You might speak too quickly, or not at all. You might over-explain, or shut down. You might try to regain control, or withdraw to avoid making it worse. And afterward, you replay it. You think about what you should have said, how you could have handled it better, how you didn't feel like yourself. This is one of the most frustrating experiences, because you know you are capable of more. But in the moment, you couldn't access it. That gap between who you are and how you show up under pressure, that's where emotional regulation lives. And this is something most people never train directly. They try to fix the outcome, the words, the behavior, but they ignore the state underneath. And the state is what determines everything. Let's slow this down. When something triggers you, your system reacts. Not because you are weak, because your brain is trying to protect you. It detects a threat, not necessarily physical, but psychological. Your status, your identity, your sense of control. And it prepares you. Your body activates. Your mind speeds up. And you move into reaction mode. This happens fast. Too fast to think your way out in the moment. So if you rely only on thinking, you will always feel slightly behind. This is why regulation matters. Because regulation gives you space, not to eliminate emotion, but to hold it, to feel it, without being controlled by it. There are 3 practical layers to this. The first is physical. Your breath, your posture, your tension. When something triggers you, Your breathing changes immediately. It becomes shallow, faster, higher in the chest. This amplifies the stress response. If you can catch this early and slow your breath down, even slightly, you interrupt the escalation. You create a small gap, and that gap is everything. It gives you time. Time to not react immediately. Time to choose. This does not need to be obvious. You don't need to step away or make it visible. Just a slower inhale, a longer exhale, a softening of the body. This is enough to shift your system. The second layer is cognitive, how you interpret what is happening. Most emotional reactions are intensified by meaning, not the event itself. Someone interrupts you, that's the event. You interpret it as disrespect, that's the meaning, and that meaning triggers a stronger reaction. But what if you shifted the interpretation, not in a forced, positive way, but in a flexible way? They might be rushing. They might not realize. This doesn't need to be escalated. That small shift reduces intensity, and when intensity drops, your options increase. You can respond instead of react. The third layer is exposure. You do not build emotional control by avoiding difficult moments. You build it by staying in them, long enough for your system to learn. The first time it feels overwhelming. The second time, slightly less. Over time, your tolerance increases. You realize something important. You can feel strong emotions and still function. You can be triggered and still choose your behavior. This is where confidence becomes durable. Not because you avoid pressure, because you can stay stable inside it. There is another shift that matters. You stop trying to eliminate emotion. Most people think confidence means calm all the time. No anxiety, no frustration, no uncertainty. But that's not realistic, and chasing that state creates more pressure. Real confidence allows emotion, but does not obey it blindly. You can feel anger without speaking harshly. You can feel nervous without shrinking. You can feel uncertain without freezing. That is control. Not control over what you feel, control over what you do. And that distinction is critical. Because when you stop expecting yourself to feel perfect, you become more capable of acting well. There is something else you need to see clearly. Difficult moments are not interruptions, they are training. Every time you are triggered, you are being shown your current level, not your potential, your current level. And that can feel uncomfortable, because it exposes where you lose control, where you react automatically, where your patterns take over. But that exposure is useful, because now you know where to work. Instead of avoiding those moments, you begin to use them, not to prove something, but to practice, to notice earlier, to regulate faster, to respond more clearly. Each time, a small improvement. Not perfect, better. And that builds something real. Because now your confidence is not based on ideal conditions. It is based on your ability to handle non-ideal ones. And that changes how you move through life. You stop fearing difficult conversations. You stop overthinking potential conflict. You stop trying to control every outcome because you trust something deeper. Not that everything will go well, but that you will remain intact, even when it doesn't. That is emotional strength. Not loud, not visible at first, but undeniable over time. And once you have that, you are no longer easily shaken. Chapter 9. Pressure reveals your training. There is a moment that arrives without warning. No preparation, no perfect conditions, No time to think everything through. A question is directed at you. A decision must be made. A mistake becomes visible. A conversation turns tense. And suddenly, you are in it. This is where most people hope confidence will appear. But hope is not enough. Because pressure does not create confidence. It reveals it. Or more precisely, it reveals your training. Whatever patterns you have practiced up to that point, those are the ones that will show up. Not the ones you intended. Not the ones you rehearsed once. The ones you have repeated consistently. This is why people are often surprised by themselves in high-pressure moments. They thought they would stay calm, but they rushed. They thought they would speak clearly, but they froze. They thought they would hold their ground, but they gave in. And afterward, it feels confusing. Why did I act like that? But if you look closer, it wasn't random. It was familiar. Under pressure, your system does not rise to your expectations. It falls back to what it knows. That is the baseline. And the baseline is built in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. This is where people misunderstand growth. They think the big moment is where change happens. But the big moment is where patterns show themselves. Change happens before that. In small, quiet repetitions. How you respond when something minor goes wrong. How you handle a small disagreement. How you deal with a slight discomfort. How you react when things are just a little inconvenient. Those moments seem insignificant. But they are training. And that training accumulates. If your default is to avoid discomfort, you will avoid under pressure. If your default is to rush when uncertain, you will rush under pressure. If your default is to seek approval, you will seek it more intensely when the stakes are higher. Pressure does not introduce new behavior. It amplifies existing behavior. This is why preparation matters, but not in the way most people think. Preparation is not about memorizing exactly what you will say, or rehearsing every possible scenario, because reality does not follow scripts. And when it deviates, rigid preparation collapses. Real preparation is different. It builds adaptability. Instead of memorizing words, you deepen understanding, so you can speak from multiple angles. Instead of rehearsing exact responses, you practice thinking clearly, so you can adjust in real time. Instead of trying to control every variable, you train your system to stay functional, even when variables change. This creates a different kind of confidence. Not confidence that everything will go as planned. Confidence that you can handle what happens when it doesn't. There is another important shift here. How you interpret pressure. Most people experience pressure as something negative, something to avoid, something that interferes with performance. And when they feel it, they try to calm it down, to reduce it, to escape it. But pressure is not inherently harmful. It is energy, heightened focus, increased alertness, activation. The same physiological state can either disrupt you or sharpen you. The difference is interpretation. If you interpret it as danger, your system tightens, your thinking narrows, your performance drops. If you interpret it as readiness, something changes. You stop resisting the energy. You use it. Your focus sharpens. Your presence increases. Your actions become more deliberate. The sensation is similar, the meaning is different, and meaning shapes response. This is why reframing matters, not as a trick, as a shift in relationship. Instead of, I'm nervous, you begin to recognize, my system is activated. Instead of, this is too much. You see, this matters. That subtle change reduces resistance, and when resistance drops, you can work with the moment instead of against it. There is also something practical that most people ignore. Your breathing under pressure. It changes immediately, faster, shallower, higher, and that reinforces the stress response. But if you can control your breath, you can influence your state. Even in the middle of pressure, a slower inhale, a longer exhale, a brief pause. This is not dramatic, but it is powerful. Because it signals to your system, we are not in danger. And that keeps your thinking online. It keeps your clarity available. There is one more layer that separates people who handle pressure well from those who don't. Perspective. Under pressure, your attention narrows. You focus on what is right in front of you, the immediate risk, the immediate discomfort, and you lose sight of the bigger picture. What actually matters, what the real goal is, what outcome you are moving toward. This is where people make reactive decisions. They solve the immediate discomfort, but create larger problems. To counter this, you need to step back, even briefly, mentally. Ask yourself, what matters here? What is the actual objective? What response serves that objective best? This expands your thinking. It brings strategy back into the moment. And when strategy returns, you regain control. Not control over the situation, control over your response to it. Over time, something shifts. Pressure stops feeling like an interruption. It becomes a familiar environment. Not comfortable, but known. And when something is known, it becomes manageable. You stop fearing those moments, not because they are easy, because you trust your ability inside them. You trust your training, and that trust changes how you enter situations. You don't avoid them. You don't over-prepare to the point of rigidity. You engage with awareness, with presence, with a system that has been trained in smaller moments, ready for larger ones. That is what real confidence looks like under pressure. Not perfection, not calm at all times, but capability. The ability to stay functional when it matters most. And once you have that, pressure stops being something you survive. It becomes something you use. Chapter 10. Fear is not the signal to stop. Most people have been taught to interpret fear in one way, as a warning, a signal that something is wrong, a sign that they should pause, rethink, or step back. And sometimes, that interpretation is useful. But most of the time, especially in modern life, it is not accurate. Because fear does not only appear when something is dangerous. It appears when something is unfamiliar, when something matters, when something could change your direction. And if you treat all fear as danger, you will spend most of your life avoiding the very things that would expand you. This is where everything becomes distorted. You feel fear before speaking honestly, so you stay quiet. You feel fear before taking a risk, so you delay. You feel fear before setting a boundary, so you tolerate what you shouldn't. You feel fear before stepping into something new, so you remain where you are. And because you avoid these moments, your system learns something. These situations are dangerous, not because they are, because you never stayed long enough to discover otherwise. That is the pattern. Fear appears. You retreat. Your system reinforces the fear. Next time it appears faster, stronger, more convincing. And over time, your world becomes smaller. Not dramatically, gradually, quietly. Until one day, you realize that you are no longer choosing your life. You are managing your comfort. That is not confidence. That is containment. But fear itself is not the problem. Misinterpreting fear is. Because fear carries information. It tells you, this matters. This is uncertain. This could change something. That information is valuable. It points you toward edges, toward growth, toward areas where your current identity is being challenged. And those edges are exactly where development happens. The people who build real confidence are not the ones who feel the least fear. They are the ones who respond to it differently. They do not treat fear as a command. They treat it as a signal to pay attention, to prepare, to engage, to move forward carefully, but forward nonetheless. There is something important to understand here. Fear is not just information. It is also energy. When your system activates, it releases something. Heightened alertness, increased focus, physical readiness. Your body is preparing you, not just to escape, but to act. The same energy you feel as fear is the energy used by performers before stepping on stage, by athletes before competition, by leaders in critical moments. The difference is not the sensation, it is the direction. If you resist that energy, if you try to suppress it completely, it works against you. It becomes anxiety. It becomes tension. It disrupts your ability to function. But if you allow it, if you channel it, it sharpens you. It brings you into the moment. It focuses your attention. It increases your capacity to act. This is the shift. Fear is not something to eliminate. It is something to use. And that requires a different relationship. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? You begin to ask, how do I move with this feeling? That question changes your behavior. Because now you are not waiting for fear to disappear. You are learning to act alongside it. There is a practical way to build this. Progressive exposure. You do not jump into the most intense situation immediately. You step into manageable levels of discomfort. You stay there. You experience it fully. And then you repeat. Each time your tolerance increases, your system learns, this is not as dangerous as we thought. And that learning is what reduces fear over time. Not avoidance, exposure. But exposure must be calibrated. If it is too small, nothing changes. If it is too overwhelming, your system reinforces fear. You need to find the edge, the place where you feel something, but can still remain present. That is where growth happens. There is another way fear can be used. As a focusing tool. When you are afraid, your attention narrows. You become more alert, more aware. Most people try to escape this state, but you can direct it. Instead of letting fear scatter your thoughts, you guide it. What matters right now? What do I need to do next? What is the simplest, clear action I can take? This brings structure into the moment, and structure stabilizes your response. There is also a deeper layer. Purpose. Fear is strongest when everything is about you. Your image, your outcome, your comfort, your safety. But when something larger is involved, fear shifts. If you are speaking to contribute something meaningful, fear becomes secondary. If you are protecting something you care about, fear loses priority. If you are acting in alignment with something important, fear becomes part of the process, not the center of it. This is why purpose matters, not as a concept, as a stabilizing force. It moves your attention outward. And when your attention moves outward, fear loses some of its intensity. Not completely, but enough. Enough for you to act. There is something else you need to see clearly. Avoiding fear does not eliminate it. It preserves it. And often, it amplifies it. Facing fear does not eliminate it immediately, but it transforms your relationship to it. And over time, that relationship determines your life, because every meaningful direction requires you to cross discomfort, to step into uncertainty, to risk outcomes you cannot fully control. If you are unwilling to feel fear, you are unwilling to grow. And if you are willing to feel fear, but not be controlled by it, your range expands, your options increase, your confidence deepens. Not because fear disappeared, because it no longer dictates your decisions. So the next time fear appears, pause, not to retreat, to recognize this matters. This is unfamiliar. This is where growth could happen. And then ask yourself one simple question. Am I willing to move forward, even with this feeling here? That is where confidence begins. Not in the absence of fear, but in your willingness to walk with it. Chapter 11. The Art of Inner Authority. At some point, confidence stops being about how you handle situations and becomes about how you relate to yourself, because you can learn to speak clearly. You can learn to manage pressure. You can learn to regulate your emotions. But if you still do not trust your own judgment, you will hesitate at the moments that matter most. You will look outward for reassurance, for permission, for confirmation that you are doing the right thing. And while input from others can be useful, relying on it too heavily creates something fragile, a dependence. Because now your direction is not fully yours. It is influenced by whoever you are listening to in that moment. This is where inner authority comes in. Not arrogance, not believing you are always right, but having a grounded trust in your ability to decide, to choose, to move. Even when there is uncertainty, even when there is no perfect answer. Most people struggle here because they were never trained to trust themselves. They were trained to avoid mistakes, to seek approval, to minimize risk, to get things right. And this creates a pattern. You gather more information than necessary. You delay decisions. You look for external validation. You overthink, not because you are incapable, because you are trying to eliminate uncertainty. But uncertainty cannot be eliminated. It can only be navigated. And confidence grows when you learn to navigate it, not avoid it. There is something important to understand. Good decision-making is not about always choosing the perfect option. It is about making a choice and then engaging with it fully, adjusting if needed, learning as you go. But most people stay stuck in evaluation mode, comparing options endlessly, trying to predict every outcome, and this creates paralysis, because every option has unknowns, every direction has risk, and the longer you stay in analysis, the heavier the decision feels, the more pressure you place on yourself, until it becomes harder to move at all. Inner authority breaks this pattern. It allows you to say, "This is my best judgment right now, and I'm willing to move with it." Not because it is perfect, because it is sufficient. That shift removes a lot of pressure, because now you are not trying to guarantee success. You are trusting your ability to respond, and that is a much more stable foundation. There is also a connection between inner authority and self-respect. Every time you ignore your own judgment, every time you override what you know is true for you, you weaken that relationship. You send a signal to yourself. We don't trust our own voice. And over time, that voice becomes quieter, less clear, less accessible. But the opposite is also true. Every time you listen to yourself, even in small ways, you strengthen it. You build a sense of alignment, and that alignment creates stability. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you know where you stand. There is something else that interferes with this: the fear of being wrong. This is one of the biggest barriers to inner authority. Because if you believe being wrong is unacceptable, you will hesitate. You will second guess. You will delay. You will seek more input, trying to protect yourself from making a mistake. But mistakes are part of the process, not a failure of it. You do not build confidence by avoiding being wrong. You build it by learning you can recover, adjust, continue, and that requires a different standard. Instead of asking, "What if I choose wrong?" you begin to ask, "If this doesn't work, can I handle it?" That question brings you back to capacity, and capacity is where confidence lives. There is also a practical side to this: decision speed, not rushed decisions, but unnecessary delay. Notice where you hesitate longer than needed: small choices, simple actions, moments where you already know what you want to do. But you pause, you check again, you wait, you look for confirmation. These are training moments. Each time you act without over-delaying, you reinforce trust. Each time you hesitate unnecessarily, you reinforce doubt. And over time, this shapes your identity. You either become someone who moves or someone who waits. There is also a connection between inner authority and boundaries. If you do not trust your own judgment, it becomes difficult to set limits. Because you question yourself. Am I being too harsh? Am I overreacting? Should I just let this go? And while reflection is important, constant self-doubt weakens your position. You start tolerating things that do not align with you. You stay quiet when something feels off. You prioritize comfort over clarity. Inner authority allows you to respond differently, not aggressively, but clearly. You can say no. You can hold a position. You can express a limit without needing everyone to agree. Because you are not measuring your decision by approval. You are measuring it by alignment. This is where confidence becomes internal, not dependent on outcomes, not dependent on reactions, but grounded in your relationship with yourself. And that relationship is built through action, through choosing, through moving, through adjusting, not through waiting for certainty, because certainty rarely comes before action. It comes after you have moved enough times and seen that you can handle the results. There is a final layer to this. You will not always feel confident when making decisions. Sometimes you will feel unsure. Sometimes you will feel pressure. Sometimes you will feel resistance. But that does not mean you are not ready. It means you are human. And confidence is not about removing that. It is about not letting it stop you. So the next time you find yourself hesitating, pause for a moment. Not to delay, to check. What do I actually think here? What do I know? What feels aligned? And then move. Not perfectly, but honestly. Because every time you act from that place, you strengthen something deeper than confidence. You strengthen trust. And trust is what allows confidence to remain stable, even when everything around you is not. Chapter 12. Presence that changes the room. There are people who walk into a room and nothing changes. And there are people who walk into a room and something shifts. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that is felt. Conversations slow slightly. Attention reorganizes. People become a little more aware. a little more grounded. You might not even be able to explain why, but you notice it. That is presence, and most people misunderstand it. They think presence is charisma, energy, volume, dominance, being the center of attention. But real presence is almost the opposite. It is not about taking more space. It is about being fully in the space you already occupy, without fragmentation, without distraction, without performing. Presence is what happens when your attention is not split, when you are not thinking about yourself while you are speaking, when you are not rehearsing while you are listening, when you are not managing perception while you are interacting. You are just there. And that is rare, because most people are only partially present. They are physically in the room, but mentally somewhere else, thinking ahead, replaying something, monitoring themselves. And that creates a kind of absence. Even when they are speaking, you can feel it. They are there, but not fully. Now contrast that with someone who is present. When they listen, they are actually listening, not waiting, not preparing a response, not interrupting internally, just receiving. And because of that, when they speak, it lands differently. Their words carry more weight, not because they are more complex, because they are more connected. Presence changes how communication is experienced. It slows things down. It creates space. It allows meaning to come through more clearly. There is something important to understand here. Presence is not something you add. It is something you remove obstacles to. The obstacle is usually internal noise, overthinking, self-monitoring, anticipation, judgment. All of these pull your attention away from the moment. And when your attention leaves, your presence weakens. This is why trying to be more present often doesn't work, because you are adding effort instead of reducing interference. The shift is subtle. You stop trying to manage yourself and start engaging with what is in front of you. That could be a person, a conversation, a task, a moment. You bring your attention there, fully, not partially, not with one part of you somewhere else. Just here, now. That sounds simple, but it requires discipline, because your mind will try to move. It will drift. It will comment. It will analyze. And each time it does, you bring it back. Gently. Without frustration. Just returning. Again and again. Over time, this becomes easier, and your baseline changes. You become less scattered, less reactive, more steady. There is also a connection between presence and pace. Most people move too quickly. They speak quickly. They respond quickly. They fill silence quickly. Because silence feels uncomfortable. Because slowing down feels risky. But when you slow down, something shifts. You give yourself time to think, time to feel, time to choose your response. And others feel that. They feel less rushed, less pressured, more engaged. This is why confident people often appear calm. Not because they are never activated, but because they are not driven by urgency. They allow space, and space creates clarity. There is also something powerful about attention. Where you place it changes how others feel. If you give someone your full attention, they feel it. They feel seen, heard, valued. Not in an exaggerated way, in a quiet, direct way. And this builds connection quickly, because most people are not used to being fully attended to. They are used to partial attention. So when they experience presence, it stands out. This is one of the most underrated aspects of confidence. Not how well you speak, how well you listen. Because listening well requires stability. It requires not needing to insert yourself constantly. It requires not being threatened by silence. It requires being comfortable not being the center, and that level of comfort is a form of confidence. There is another layer to presence: clarity of thought. When your mind is scattered, your speech becomes scattered. You ramble, you repeat, you lose direction. But when your mind is organized, your communication reflects that. You say what you mean. You stop when it's said. You don't add unnecessary layers. This creates impact, not through complexity, through precision. And precision comes from presence. Because when you are present, you are aware of what matters, and you don't dilute it. There is something else that emerges from presence: influence, not forced, not strategic in a manipulative way, but natural. People trust those who are steady. They listen to those who are clear. They follow those who are not easily shaken. And presence supports all of that, because it signals something deeper. I am here. I am not scattered. I am not trying to prove something. I am engaged with what is real. That is what people respond to, even if they cannot explain it. So if you want to build presence, start with your attention. Notice when it leaves. Bring it back. Notice when you rush. Slow slightly. Notice when you fill space unnecessarily. Allow a pause. Notice when you start monitoring yourself. Shift outward, back to the moment, back to the person, back to what is happening. This is not something you master in a day. It is something you practice, moment by moment, and over time, it becomes natural. You stop thinking about being present because you are. And when that happens, you don't need to try to stand out. You already do. Not loudly, but clearly. And that clarity is what changes the room. Chapter 13. Self-worth that does not collapse with results. There is a kind of confidence that looks strong, but breaks easily. It holds together when things are going well, when you are succeeding, when you are being recognized, when people respond positively. But the moment something shifts, a failure, a rejection, a mistake, a moment of being overlooked, that confidence cracks, and underneath it, something unstable appears: doubt, tension, overthinking, the need to recover quickly, to fix the image, to prove something again. This is what happens when your confidence is built on results, and most people build it this way without realizing it. You achieve something, and you feel good. You receive approval, and you feel validated. You succeed, and you feel confident. There is nothing wrong with that. But if your sense of self depends on maintaining that pattern, you become fragile. Because results are not stable. They change. They fluctuate. They are influenced by factors outside your control. And if your confidence rises and falls with them, you are constantly adjusting, constantly reacting, constantly trying to protect something that cannot be fully secured. This creates pressure, not just to succeed, but to maintain the identity of someone who succeeds. And that pressure interferes with performance. It makes you cautious. It makes you tight. It makes you avoid situations where failure is possible. Because failure is no longer just an outcome. It becomes a threat to how you see yourself. This is where self-worth comes in, not as a concept, as a foundation. Self-worth answers a simple question: what happens to me when things don't go well? Do you collapse? Do you question your value? Do you replay everything? Do you withdraw? Or do you remain intact, not unaffected, but stable? There's a difference between being disappointed and being destabilized. Self-worth determines which one you experience. If your worth is tied to outcomes, every result becomes personal. A failed attempt becomes, "I'm not good enough." A rejection becomes, "I'm not valued." A mistake becomes, "I'm not capable." But if your worth is grounded differently, results become information. Useful, sometimes uncomfortable, but not defining. You can fail and still respect yourself. You can be rejected and still remain steady. You can make mistakes and still trust your ability to continue. That is a completely different experience, and it changes how you approach everything, because now you are not protecting your identity, you are engaging with reality. There is a key shift that makes this possible: separating who you are from what happens. You are not your last result. You are not your last performance. You are not your current situation. These are events, not identity. But most people blend them together. They use outcomes as evidence of worth, and that creates instability. Because outcomes are not consistent, self-worth needs a different anchor, something that does not fluctuate with every external change. That anchor can be built through process, through values, through how you show up. Instead of asking, "Did I succeed?" you begin to ask, "Did I act in alignment? Did I engage fully? Did I respond honestly? Did I learn something useful?" These questions shift the focus from outcome to process, and process is within your control. Not perfectly, but consistently. This creates stability, because now your sense of self is not dependent on winning. It is connected to how you move, how you decide, how you respond. And that is something you can carry into any situation. There is also a deeper layer: acceptance. Not passive acceptance, not settling, but acknowledging where you are without turning it into a problem. Most people practice conditional self-acceptance. They accept themselves when things are going well, when they are performing, when they are meeting their own expectations. But when they fall short, they turn against themselves. They criticize, they judge, they withdraw, and this creates internal conflict. Because now you are not just dealing with the situation, you are dealing with your reaction to yourself. Self-worth removes that layer. It allows you to say, "This is where I am. This is what happened. And I can still move forward," without needing to punish yourself first. This does not reduce growth. It supports it. Because when you are not afraid of your own reaction, you become more willing to take risks, to try, to engage, to fail, and learn. There is another important piece: values. What do you stand for? What matters to you? Not what should matter, not what others expect, but what is actually important to you. When your actions align with your values, you feel stable. Even if outcomes are uncertain, even if others disagree, even if things don't work immediately. Because you are not measuring yourself by external approval. You are measuring yourself by internal alignment. And that creates a different kind of confidence. One that is quieter, but more durable. There is also something practical here. Notice how you talk to yourself. Not in an abstract way. In real moments. After a mistake. After a difficult interaction. After something doesn't go as planned. Is your voice harsh? Critical? Final? Or is it steady? Constructive? Open? This matters. Because your internal tone shapes your willingness to continue. If your inner voice punishes you, you will avoid situations where that voice might appear. If your inner voice supports you, you will be more willing to engage, not recklessly, but consistently. Self-worth is not built in one moment. It is built through repetition, through how you respond to yourself over time, through how you interpret outcomes, through how you move after things don't go as expected. And once it is established, something changes. You stop fearing failure in the same way. You stop needing constant validation. You stop attaching your identity to every result. You become more stable, more willing, more open. Not because everything is easy, but because you are not fragile inside it. That is what allows confidence to last. Not success, not approval, stability. And that stability is built from within. Chapter 14. Momentum builds identity. Confidence is not built in single moments, not in one conversation, not in one success, not even in one breakthrough. It is built in patterns, repeated actions that slowly become who you are. And the problem is, most people underestimate the power of those patterns. They think change requires something dramatic, a big decision, a complete reset, a sudden transformation. So they wait. They wait for the right moment, the right energy, the right level of motivation. And while they wait, nothing compounds. Because confidence does not grow from intensity. It grows from consistency, from what you do repeatedly, even when it feels small, even when it feels insignificant, even when it doesn't feel like it's working yet. Let's make this real. Think about a promise you make to yourself. Something simple. You will speak up once in a meeting. You will finish a task without delaying it. You will say what you actually think in a conversation. You will follow through on something you usually avoid. The action itself is small, but what matters is whether you do it. Because when you do, your system records it. Not just as behavior, as identity. I do what I say, and when you repeat that enough times, something shifts. You stop negotiating with yourself constantly. You stop needing external pressure. You start trusting your own follow-through. That is momentum. And momentum is powerful because it feeds itself. One completed action makes the next one easier. Not because the action changes, because your relationship to yourself changes. You start expecting yourself to act. And expectation shapes behavior. This is why inconsistency is so damaging. Not because you miss one action, because of the pattern it creates. You say you will do something, and then you don't. And your system records that too. We don't follow through. We delay. We hesitate. And over time, that becomes automatic. Not something you think about, something you assume. And once that assumption is in place, everything becomes harder. Because now every action carries resistance. You are not just doing the task, you are pushing against your own pattern. This is why small consistency matters more than big effort. A large action done once feels good, but it doesn't always change identity. A small action repeated consistently does, because identity is built through repetition, not intensity. There is also something important to understand. Momentum is not about perfection. You will miss days. You will fall short. You will have moments where you don't follow through. That is part of the process. What matters is how quickly you return. Do you stop completely, or do you reset? Because the longer you stay out of the pattern, the harder it is to re-enter it. But if you return quickly, you maintain continuity. And continuity is what builds momentum. There is another layer to this: feedback loops. Every action creates a response. You act. You experience a result. That result influences your next action. If the loop is positive, it reinforces itself. You act. You see progress. You feel more capable. You act again, and the cycle strengthens. But if the loop is negative, it also reinforces itself. You hesitate. You avoid. You feel less capable. You hesitate again, and the cycle continues. The goal is not to create perfect outcomes. It is to create positive loops, even small ones. Because once a loop is established, it becomes easier to maintain than to break. This is why starting matters. Not dramatically, consistently. There is also something practical here: the scale of your actions. Most people overestimate what they should do and underestimate what they can sustain. They set goals that are too large, too demanding, too far from their current pattern, and when they fail to maintain them, they reinforce inconsistency. A better approach is to reduce the scale, make the action smaller, more manageable, something you can repeat, not occasionally, regularly, because repetition is what builds evidence, and evidence builds confidence. This applies across everything: communication, work, relationships, personal habits. Every area is shaped by patterns, not isolated moments. There is also a connection between momentum and energy. Not time, energy. You might have time to act, but not the energy. And when your energy is low, your actions suffer. So managing energy becomes important. Physical energy, mental clarity, emotional stability. When these are supported, your ability to act consistently increases, and consistency strengthens momentum. There is another factor: environment. Your surroundings influence your behavior more than you think. If your environment supports distraction, you will be distracted. If it supports focus, you will focus more easily. If the people around you reinforce hesitation, you will hesitate more. If they reinforce action, you will act more. This is not about blame. It is about awareness. You shape your environment, and your environment shapes you. So if you want to build momentum, you adjust the conditions, not perfectly, but intentionally. Make it easier to act, reduce friction, remove unnecessary obstacles, because willpower is limited, but structure can support consistency. There is one more piece: acknowledgement. Most people wait for big results to feel progress. But momentum is built in small steps, and if you don't recognize those steps, you lose reinforcement. You miss the signal. So you need to notice, not in a dramatic way, just awareness. I did what I said. I followed through. I stayed in that moment. That acknowledgement matters because it strengthens the pattern. It tells your system, this is who we are becoming. And over time, that becomes true. Not because you declared it, because you built it. So if you are looking to build confidence, do not look for one big moment. Look at your patterns. What are you doing repeatedly? What are you avoiding repeatedly? What are you reinforcing daily? Because that is shaping your identity, whether you realize it or not. And if you change those patterns, even slightly, consistently, something powerful begins to form: momentum. And once momentum is in place, confidence is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you carry. Chapter 15. Becoming someone who cannot be easily shaken. At the beginning, Confidence feels like something you're trying to build, something you're working toward, something you are not quite yet. But if you stay with this process long enough, something changes. You stop thinking about confidence so much, and you start noticing something else. You are harder to shake, not immune, not unaffected, but steadier. Situations that used to destabilize you don't hit the same way. Moments that used to create overthinking pass more quickly. Reactions that used to take over lose their grip faster. You begin to recover faster, adjust faster, continue more easily. And this is where confidence becomes real. Not because everything is easy, because you are no longer easily thrown off by difficulty. This is a different kind of strength, not visible at first, not loud, but consistent, reliable. You trust yourself in a way you didn't before, not because you believe you will always succeed, but because you know you won't collapse. There is a difference. One is based on outcome. The other is based on capacity. And capacity is what makes you resilient. Let's make this clear. Being unshaken does not mean you don't feel. You still feel discomfort. You still feel uncertainty. You still feel pressure. But those feelings don't take over the same way. They pass through you. Instead of defining you, you don't attach to them immediately. You don't build stories around them as quickly. You don't let them dictate your next move. You notice them, and then you continue. That is the shift. And it is built from everything you've been practicing. Your relationship with fear, your ability to regulate your body, your awareness of your thoughts, your capacity to act without perfect conditions, your consistency over time, your self-worth independent of results, your presence in the moment. All of these come together, not as separate skills, as one integrated way of being. This is where confidence becomes quiet. You are not trying to appear confident. You are not thinking about how you are perceived constantly. You are not managing your image in every interaction. You are simply operating, responding, moving. And because of that, others experience you differently. Not because you changed how you look, because you changed how you hold yourself. There is something important here. You will still have difficult moments. Moments where you react faster than you want. Moments where you hesitate. Moments where old patterns show up. That does not mean you've lost your progress. It means you are human. The difference is what happens next. You notice it faster. You correct sooner. You don't spiral the same way. You don't turn one moment into a larger story. You return. That ability to return, that is what keeps you stable. Not perfection. Recovery. There is also a shift in how you see others. When you are insecure, other people feel like threats. You compare. You measure. You adjust. You try to position yourself. But when you are more stable, that changes. You are less reactive to others' energy, less influenced by their approval or disapproval. You can engage more directly, more honestly, without needing to manage everything. This creates better interactions, clearer communication, stronger relationships. Not because you are trying harder, because you are not compensating. There is another layer: responsibility. As you become more stable, you become more capable. And with that capability comes responsibility. Not in a heavy way, in a natural one. You influence environments more. Your presence affects others. Your decisions carry more weight. And how you show up matters more. So confidence is not just about you anymore. It becomes about what you contribute, how you affect others, what you bring into spaces. Because real confidence is not about dominance. It is about clarity and stability. And those qualities create impact. You don't need to force influence. It happens through how you are. There is also something you need to protect: your environment, your inputs, the people you spend time with, the content you consume, the situations you place yourself in. These all affect your state. And if you are not aware of that, you can slowly lose stability. Not suddenly, gradually. So part of maintaining confidence is protecting what supports it. Not rigidly, but intentionally. Choosing environments that align with how you want to operate. Reducing exposure to patterns that pull you backward. Because what you surround yourself with becomes your baseline. There is a final shift. Confidence stops being something you think about, because it becomes integrated. You don't wake up asking, "Do I feel confident today?" You wake up and move. You respond to what's in front of you. You handle situations as they come. And confidence is simply part of that. Not something separate. Not something you turn on. Something that is already there. And when you reach this point, something interesting happens. You become less focused on yourself and more focused on what you're doing, what you're building, what you're contributing. Confidence becomes background, and that's when it's strongest, because it's no longer fragile. It's no longer dependent on constant attention. It's part of your structure, your default, not perfect, but stable. And from that place, your range expands. You take on things you wouldn't have before. You move into spaces that once felt uncomfortable. You handle situations that used to overwhelm you. Not because they changed, because you did. That is the real transformation. Not becoming fearless, not becoming flawless, becoming steady, becoming responsive, becoming someone who can move through uncertainty without losing themselves. And once you become that person, your life opens in ways that are difficult to explain, but easy to feel. Because you are no longer waiting. You are no longer avoiding. You are no longer held back by the same patterns. You are moving, consistently, clearly, with a foundation that supports you. And that is what it means to become someone who cannot be easily shaken.